Hey, everybody. I am delighted to host one of my friends and community industry colleagues, Patrick O'Keefe. I would say he is a seasoned vet of the community industry, someone that everyone looks up to, always has great things to say, great things to tell you. He's a community builder, a consultant, a podcast host, and author of one of the seminal books on community management, I would consider, called Managing Online Forums. And I was reminded recently that that book is 13 years old. And I thought it would be fun to call up Patrick and just see if he wanted to share some thoughts on how the book has aged and some of the advice that he gave. I went back and reread it, and it really sparked a lot of things in my mind. So I'm sort of curious to dig into how things have stayed the same, how things have changed over time. So welcome, Patrick.
Hey, Rosemary, thanks for having me. I don't know if everyone has nice things to say about me, but hopefully enough people do that I can sustain myself. I appreciate all the kind words. I think that, how you're someone who's been in the space for a long time and in the community software space for a very, very long time. And if this is a seminal book, I mean, you were there before it came out. So obviously you have a long history in this work.
Thank you. And not to age myself, but yeah, when I first read the book, I found myself nodding my head a lot. So that if that says anything, also regarding what people say about you, I will say someone called you the bad boy of community the other day on Twitter. And I thought, you know what? It's because Patrick's not afraid to speak his mind and say what he's really thinking. So I really value that about you. And wherever the chips fall, I think it's always best to speak your truth. So
yeah, the key is to punch up, not down.
Exactly. So let's just dive right in, like with a more general question. What do you think has been the biggest shift? Just if you could crystallize it into one nugget, what do you think has changed the most in terms of content moderation? And I will say, I'd like to focus in on owned communities and communities themselves rather than talking about social networks, because that would be a whole another multi-year long series of shows that we could do. And, maybe we'll talk about that sometime. But let's talk in the community space. If someone owns a community, what would you say is the biggest shift?
Yeah, so if it wasn't for that exclusion, I'd have a very easy answer. I really think the proliferation of platforms that are built not to be managed well is kind of the biggest shift, but that's social media. So with communities, it's tough. I don't know that I can crystallize it like that because it's almost like when you see someone every day, you don't necessarily notice the change that occurs over 10 years as much as if you hadn't seen them for 10 years. And so to me, being in the space, living it every day, it feels very iterative to me. So it's like we're iterating on what we do every day. And so when I think back to then, I wrote that book from 2003 to 2007. It came out in 2008. People were doing moderation very well. The space was professionalized. As some people might have started the 200th resource for a community like a decade ago, and then they decided they professionalized it. No, I mean, people were doing this work at a high level, professionally, getting paid competitively to do it. When this book came out, and so I think that the thing about scale, why I bring that up about the social media sites and social networking sites, is that great communities are often managed within their scale. And so they have the team that can handle that level of volume and do it very well. And so when people who are newer to this work come in and they look at like Twitter or Facebook and they think that's the work, right? That's the work going off the rails. Online communities like ours have had these things figured out for 20, 30 years. Like most small communities don't have a Nazi problem. Like they don't. Those people show up for 2 seconds, they get kicked out, and we go back to our day. In fact, most communities that have been around for a while and managed well have an ingrained culture where they self-reject those people. If you come into, I run a small martial arts community, karateforums.com, that turns 20 years old in 8 days. And I've managed it the whole time. If you were to come there and I was away and there was no moderators, they would self-reject. you. You would not be welcome there if you had those viewpoints. And so, I mean, that's the secret of community building though, right? Is you do it well for 10 years, you build a culture, and then you did it. Success 10 years later, you did it. So it's not a satisfying answer, but my answer is that, like, even software wise, it's tough to say, because when I talk to these software companies and like filtering tech and all these different automated possibilities, some of which are good. I'm not anti-automation. I think it can be very helpful. But where they often lack is they don't touch below the people who have money in their pockets. And so to me, innovation doesn't happen in this space because Disney, Starbucks, or some massive company got some great tool in their platform or their community. That's not innovation. That's people with money. Innovation has to touch the teenager managing an online forum like I was, 20 plus years ago. If it doesn't touch 13-year-old me trying to do his best to keep a community safe, then you're not really innovating.
Oh, wow. That was a great answer. I would like to drill in a little bit on your idea of self-rejection. I love that. And you're so right. It makes me think of it. Was there a scientific thing where the amoeba, encapsulates something that is trying to get rid of, and then it like spits it out? Sorry.
I wouldn't know. You probably know better than me. It sounds right. The host, you don't want the host to accept the parasite, right? Because bad things happen. You want the host to reject the parasite. I've learned that from a lot of zombie movies.
Exactly. Yeah, you and I could totally vibe on the movie level too. So feel free to sprinkle those movie references in. I wholeheartedly agree that it's kind of the more things change, the more things stay the same, or is it the reverse? Where there is a disconnect of like the people coming into the community industry, the 13-year-olds right now, or people looking to become community managers or moderators. The things they're absorbing and soaking in and marinating in and learning are all these lessons learned and case studies and tips and things that are all from the point of view of Disney or the big social networks or all these things that are not apples to apples. It's apples and oranges. And so that was actually one reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I've been really thinking about that too. It's like there needs to be multiple conversations about community management and really getting down to that level of talking to that person who maybe they have found a free technology they want to use, a free platform, and they want to make that work for their little club, or for, like, you have your karate forums. I think there's not a lot of oxygen in the conversation right now for that use case and for those people who are just starting out. So they try, they come in thinking, oh, I need a playbook and I need programming and I need all these things. You really don't need to worry about those things until you're way at scale. So it is interesting.
I think whenever you pick up on something that you want to do, we get into this mode of a lot of digestion of knowledge and information. Even a hobby, like I got back into collecting baseball cards last year after being out of it since I was probably 12 or 13. And I bought a bunch of cards at once. I was like, hold up, stop yourself. Don't spend any more money right now. Let's do an inventory. Let's bring it in, see what we got. And I collected a bunch of stuff. I'm not trying to flip. I'm not trying to profit, but I'm just getting back into the hobby. And I think that's true for anything that you get into, profession or hobby. And so, it's like the cart before the horse, right? I think when we think about something and we want to be good at it, we try to think about it in the perfect way. Ze Frank, who is, you're probably familiar with Ze Frank, right?
Sad Cat Diaries.
Just a genius content creator, but he has this video that I think about from time to time. I don't know if the vernacular is the right way to look at it now, but it's called Brain Crack. And so Google it, look at it. There's a song that comes up with it. It's about 2 minutes long. And the premise of it is that, we get addicted to dreaming about how perfect our ideas could be. And what happens is that we get addicted to that feeling and we see it in our mind and everyone's clapping for us. And look at this great idea we did. But the reality is that most things you do aren't going to be that great when you first do them. and you need to at some point execute, get it out there so that you can make it better and don't get addicted to that feeling of trying to make it too perfect and never actually doing it. When I started launching communities, so I started moderating in 98, started launching my own in 2000. And of course, UBB, which Rosemary was a part of, a big part of. If you're not familiar with it, UBB is sort of I would say a pioneering application in its own way, as far as putting community in the hands of people who had a little less money. It wasn't the cheapest thing. Hosting wasn't the cheapest thing to run there. I mean, they had just invented, I don't want to go too far back.
It started free.
Yeah, they had just invented virtual hosting, like right around that same time, where they could segment a web server so that multiple people could be on it. And so nobody has to worry about this stuff these days, but UBB was an important thing that inspired things like PHPBB, which ended up touching a lot of communities, inspired, I would say, things like Icon Board, a young Matt Meckham, now Envision community. It was influential in the space. UBB led to so many different other software applications and so many things, vBulletin, so many things came out after UBB, inspired by UBB, stealing from UBB in some ways, I'm sure. It was an important thing. But back then, to run a community was, goodness, what's available? There was like BraveNet, these free remotely hosted scripts that you could use, and it was so limiting. And I used one the first time, and then I realized I couldn't take my data, and I never used it again. And by that time, PHPBB had come out, and someone taught me how to install it, like localhost. What the heck's that? In the installation wizard for these applications, what are these things? You have to install it. You have to have a database.
We had professional installers who helped us.
And I mean, that happens today, obviously. The business model right now for a lot of modern, I don't really love that term, but modern community software apps is to sell the services, sell the installation, even now. So that was a model ahead of its time, or, even then. But my point is that, if I was coming into it now, people say, how do you start a community? What's you've probably been asked this 11 billion times, right? It's kind of the question everyone asks. And I think for me, there's always sort of a simple thing, which is you start with your core group of people who want the thing that you want to offer. You seed that group, and then you bring them into the community, you have them help you start it. And then every new conversation is an opportunity to invite 3 more people who can speak to that conversation. And if you do that, and have some decent guidelines, remove anyone that doesn't fit within the theme of the community, and you do nothing else, you have a good chance of success. If you look at every conversation as an opportunity to bring more people at the table, at some point, you'll be able to stop doing that if you want to, because you'll have achieved a certain level of momentum. And most importantly, it'll be with the right people. That's one thing that gets messed up in some of these seeding stages is we think about it and I'm going off on a tangent, I'll wrap this up.
Tangent away.
We think about seeding a lot of the times as just getting a number of people in the door. But seeding is such a golden opportunity to do so many great things. For example, diversity and inclusion. I'll just draw on Clubhouse, which is a platform I've been pretty openly critical of. So Clubhouse seeded with, it's a lot of VCs. And it's a lot of VCs and their friends, and they look a lot like me. And so they brought in more people like them, and that's how the community kind of grew out. I'm sure some people would disagree with that. Yes, there were some other people. Yes, there's some celebrity connections, whatever, but it started with this certain group. Now, as a community builder, you might think, I just want 100 people who like fishing if I'm starting a fishing community. But if you think about it from a diversity perspective, your community becomes more of what you are right now. So if you invite a diverse group to the table, right, diverse in race, diverse in gender, diverse in location, and you bring them together as your initial group of 10, 20, 30, 40 people, your community is going to become more like that initial group. Where if you bring in a group that's all the same, that'll happen as well. It'll become more like those same people. And so to go back to my main point, if you just start with people that want what you have and you bring people in when new conversations have started, you can deal with community programs and all that stuff at a later date.
I love that you brought it to the brass tacks, because I did want to kind of go there a little bit in this conversation, in that when I went back and I read the book, you had some interesting nuggets in there that I'm glad I kind of resurfaced in my brain. And I wanted to touch on a couple of those. One of them that really stood out to me that I haven't heard in the conversation was this idea of guides who are users who don't necessarily have powers within the community, but it's like a layer in between the admin and the
Hmm.
moderator. And people talk a lot about the site owner, the admin,
Hmm.
and about moderators, but this idea of this middle layer I thought was very intriguing.
Hmm.
Do you still
Sure.
think that's a thing that people could use?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think we see it. I think that it's funny. We have a word that gets thrown around a lot now: decentralization, decentralized. And to me, when people think about that, they think about like the blockchain or something. But like decentralization, the definition of the word decentralized means a lot of things. And I think that the traditional volunteer moderator staff model, if that's what's on your community, is a form of decentralization. It's taking power out of just a singular person or the site owner or the whoever owns the community, and it's placing it in the hands of people that are identified usually from within the community, and who help to maintain this thing that they love. So the powerless guide, and to describe them as powerless, which is how I describe them, I think, is powerless in the sense of community software tool permissions, like the ability to remove something yourself. And I think this has there's a whole spectrum to this, because if you think about what a community volunteer could do, it's more than just moderation, right? It's welcoming people, it's starting conversations, it's hosting an event in the community. I think you could, it's reporting things they see that are inappropriate, which is something I've done. I mean, I still have this model in place at karateforums.com. We have our senpais and our senseis. Senpais are these guides, senseis are moderators, traditional super moderators. And they help us find additional guideline violations. They contribute to staff conversations around sort of what we should do next or what this problem is. They help us flag things. They welcome people to the community. And so they do serve an important role. And it also helps them to get used to being on staff, which helps them to be considered for the next level, which is to be a sensei. Like no one becomes a moderator on this community without first being a guide. So you have to be a guide first. You get your kind of lay of the land. You see things, how the staff sees them, and then you can get promoted to moderator. So I think it's a great thing for a number of reasons. I think as your community matures, if you have the level of members where it makes sense to have multiple levels of volunteer staff, then I think it can work quite well.
Yeah, I just think that's brilliant, because everybody's brain automatically goes to, I need volunteer moderators.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of having almost like a career path within the
Mm-hmm.
community so that people can get pulled deeper and deeper
Mm-hmm.
into involvement with the community. And I think that builds a sense of ownership
Mm-hmm.
too. So
And I should say, I actually
love
learned that from the SitePoint forums way back when, because SitePoint had a volunteer staff program, might still have it, that was your mentor, which is the guide, advisor was the moderator, then they had a team leader, and then the administrator. So I was a SitePoint forums member, volunteer staff member there. I was a mentor. I did become an advisor. I was offered a team leader. I was like, I think I've had my time here. And, that was it. So I learned it from them and from, I think Wayne Luke, who worked at vBulletin for a long time, might have come up with that system. He was the admin when I was there.
This is the shout out show. We'll just
Mm-hmm.
like, I'll do the little pop up, ad for, no.
Hey, credit's important, right? You got to pay people, got to give people their flowers while they're still here.
The next thing people think about is the guidelines or the initial tone, the initial, what are you talking about? What are the rules of the road? And, do you have any thoughts on today, if you were sitting down,
Mm-hmm.
starting a new community, where would you start with that? Would you kind of spill out something yourself, shoot spaghetti on the wall, or
Mm-hmm.
would you involve your guides in helping you write them? What's
Mm-hmm.
your thought on that?
I mean, I guess it depends on where I'm coming from, sort of the resources I have, who it is. If I'm starting a community myself, I can alternate between imposter syndrome and supreme confidence. But when I write guidelines, I'm not throwing spaghetti at the wall at this stage. I know I have some semblance of how, like, as you do too, like how things are going to work and what the baseline things are. But I think that if I do believe it's important, especially if you are not just doing this as a hobby, right? You have to kind of think about who you want to represent, and especially at like a big brand side doing community, if we think about it in that perspective. Because although we're talking about a lot of sort of smaller communities, which is what honestly I love and I go back to, like we talked about karateforums.com, I'll be working on something for CNN and I'll think about something I did at karateforums.com 20 years ago. Like that foundation of knowledge is important, and it translates over very well to the corporate world. But one thing you should think about is if you want to protect people and make a safe place for them, which I think is the responsibility that most of us take on and take seriously. I see empathy as being just core to my work. I like to say my dad taught me attention to detail, my mom taught me empathy, and those define who I am as a community pro. And so for me, empathy is understanding or trying to understand pain and struggles that you yourself will never have to deal with, and then working to protect people from those things. So if I'm writing guidelines and policy to protect people who are not like me, who are not white men or cisgender or whatever, then I need to have some understanding into their struggle. And in order to do that, I need to talk to them. I need to read their writing. I need to understand what they're dealing with, what they're facing, so that I can write effective policy. In some way, through my own research, because obviously they don't have to do the labor for us to understand their struggle. We have to go out there and do our own work. Through our research, through our conversations with people we know, we have an internal team of people. Hopefully it's a diverse team of people that wants to help the company as a whole be better, and so you can pull into that knowledge internally. But whatever it is, you need to understand things that you yourself don't face on a daily basis so that you can write effective policy that gets to the heart of the matter and protects the people that you want to protect. So no, I think I in any case, never write guidelines in a vacuum. Even on karateforums.com, adjustments are being made. I'm talking to staff. We're talking to members in some cases. But no matter where you are, you want to involve either in research time individually, people who you hope to protect. And there's a lot of great resources out there already. There's a lot of great codes of conduct out there already that are very forward thinking and well written. And so you can draw on the work of others. And sometimes it's Creative Commons. Sometimes it's just ask. They'll be happy to let you borrow. I mean, my guidelines are and I think I said this in the book, are the result of everyone who came before me and the guidelines I've seen and sort of pulling in from people with permission. So I think we learn well from one another. And just it's not even, privilege is a part of it, but it's not even, it goes beyond that. It's like something foundational to being human, which is just understanding the experience that you have and being very self-aware of like the limit of my own experience. There are things by nature of how I look and who I am that I do not have to deal with in this world. And so I need to be able to put myself in the shoes of people who do as much as I can. And I can't just do that using my mind or with my imagination. I need to actually read and understand these struggles as best as I can.
Yeah, and I think really the crux of it is actually talking to people face to face, whether it's through Zoom or in person. That a lot of people are afraid to do that step of community building of your core people, and really not that you're necessarily pulling out of them, what is your struggle, what are you, but getting to know them as people, as human beings, when you're building the community, and really internalizing it, incorporating it into everything that you do, including the guidelines. And so I always try and tell people, one of the first things you need to do is actually have conversations, like actual conversations with the people who are your pioneers, and make sure that, their thoughts are being incorporated along the way. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and honestly, your guidelines are a living document. Like I totally believe that. There's a reason why. Like I've talked to attorneys before, at least in the U.S. Like I think Eric Goldman at Santa Clara University, I believe, was one person who told me this. But basically, like terms of service is a legal document, right? That's something drawn up by lawyers. That's not where you put be nice to each other. That's a separate document. You're in the U.S. We're allowed to moderate because of Section 230, so we don't have to have that in the terms of use, which are again legalese, legal document meant for courts. Our guidelines are where we and whatever you call them, code of conduct, are where we define how we treat one another, and those can change. Yes, you should provide notice, but it's not the same process as changing a legal document. You want to put just as much thought or consideration into it on a personal level of thinking about how you want to write it, talking to people before you actually change anything, getting feedback, making it the best it can be. But you're not painting yourself into a corner there. You can always update, announce, and adjust and move forward in a different way.
Transparency is key, right?
Yep.
What are the rules? Everyone should be aware of them and be able to see them and know them. And so you're not just the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain doing random things that nobody knows what's happening, which that sounds like some social networks I've heard of. But yeah, I think that's really, really important. Transparency. You talked about empathy too. These are sounding like another thing I wanted to touch on was the characteristics of a great community manager or a great community owner. And I everyone forgive me. I'm going to read off the characteristics that were in Patrick's book, oh, so long ago. And I was struck by how this is almost how I would describe things today. Open to learning and new ideas, good people skills and communication skills, some subject matter knowledge or willingness to learn, patience, be accessible to people, be an active participant in the community, have a thick skin, yes, care, that's a big one, and be able to make hard choices. You can't be worried about the popularity contest sometimes. You are going to have to take action that not everybody will like. So I love that list. I'm not sure there's anything I would do to tweak it, but I wanted to kind of see how do you feel today? Would you add anything?
I mean, I think I think one of the beauties. So when you write a book, how I describe it is, here's everything I know right now, judge me. That's that's how I think that's writing a book. Like it's like a fixed, I put it on paper and I put it in it. Luckily Barnes & Noble picked it up at every Barnes & Noble in the country, which is a big deal back then. I remember my publisher being like, wow, they're going to put a book about this. So I did that. I think that's a good list. I would, and I just want to touch on thick skin real quick. I do believe that. I think you need to, because we have to take abuse. It's just by virtue of the work. I would separate that, just to be clear, like in the idea of, that doesn't mean that the people that you work for or with should accept the abuse you take. Just because you have to have a thick skin doesn't mean they should be accepting of it. You should still have people protecting you as a community pro too. But yeah, so I thought about this, and I wrote an answer on Quora a few years after, and I listed out some more things. And again, I think it's a never-ending list, but I'll just go over a few things I had here. So I had attention to detail, which I mentioned before, which I think is important. I had strong communication skills, a mind for policy, good reading skills, being kind, fair, and consistent, which is I don't know. There's more of a personal thing, but still, it's important. Organizational skills, leadership capabilities, technical savvy, strong self-awareness. The ability to participate in a community and talk about things that aren't necessarily to do with the management of it. So like being present and participating in normal discussions, having a passion for community. So I mean, we've talked to people over the years, I'm sure, who want to do something and want to do a community about the thing they love. But the sad truth maybe is that starting a community takes them away from the thing they love, because now they have a new thing they need to love, which is managing a community. So you need to really have a passion for this work. Patience, just a long-term view of things, being accessible to people and being comfortable with that. And being able to make a decision. And so there's some similarities there, but there's some differences. I think it's a never-ending list, but I come back to sort of the core things of like attention to detail and empathy. That's me personally, and that's what I rely on. But yeah, so I think there's a few additions in there. But the good thing about all those things, I think, is they're software independent, they're technology independent, so they translate well. I mean, a lot of community people who have been in it for a long time, like us, have transitioned into other roles or social media roles. And what I have found and what I believe is that, like at a core level, managing a community, and especially moderation, especially active reading content, taking a look at it, deciding if it's the right thing for this community, what should happen with it. Should it be celebrated? Should it not be celebrated? Whatever. That's so foundational that the people who have a strong understanding of that, they translate super well to these social media roles, because social media is, it's just not the same level of intense focus on each individual piece of content, where you're actually weighing it and what it means in this space that you are responsible for. Like, yes, if you're monitoring Twitter, you're reading all the tweets, but you're not thinking about it in a sense like, I'm responsible for the tweet. It's not in my sandbox. Yes, everyone might see it, and it's a different customer service conversation because it's out in public, but that's not the same as being sort of responsible for each individual piece of content that's on this thing that you yourself decided to create one day. I think roundabout answer, it's a good list. I'm sure other people out there listening can come up with characteristics they think are important as well.
I think you need to have almost a mad scientist component to the characteristics too, a willingness to experiment. And maybe you hit on that a little bit with the willingness to learn.
8-9 years ago, I think I have a document on my computer, just a Word doc that's titled Ethical Community Building. And I started this article writing about what I think are the principles of ethical community building. And it's stuff like, it certainly impacts respect and our responsibilities when it comes to racist and racism and sort of those sorts of obviously bad activities. But it also talks about things like data portability and like the notice that you give people that you're closing, access to data. There's a lot of different considerations, and the list just keeps getting bigger. That article just keeps getting bigger, and it's never come out.
Maybe it should be a book, Patrick.
I don't.
We need a follow-up.
It might be something, but like one day maybe I'll get to a point where I publish that list. But I've been working on this ethical community building list for 5-6 years, and it'll never be complete because we'll always find new ethical quandaries that we'll need to navigate, and hopefully there'll be a clear, good path. There isn't always.
I would read that book. I think you need to actually produce that. Put that. Thank you so much, Patrick.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Rosemary.